And so I'm going to read to you first from Hans Kohn. Anybody, any Hans Kohn fans out there? All right, Pauline. Hans Kohn was a Jewish philosopher and political scientist. Was born originally in Prague, but he moved to Palestine in 1925, but later broke from Brit Shalom and broke from the Zionist movement and moved to the United States. He moved to the United States in 1934, and he taught and spent the rest of his life there. He died in 1971. He taught at Smith College, he taught at City College in New York, and he wrote for his time, some of the most important works on nationalism. And he very consciously, after the Arab riots of 1929, which was a huge traumatic event for the population in historic Palestine, he broke with the Zionist movement. He wrote a letter to Martin Buber, who was his teacher, really, and his mentor in Brit Shalom, and said, "I'm leaving the Zionist movement." So I want to read to you from Hans Kohn's letter to Martin Buber, November 1929, right after the Arab riots, where he formally breaks with the Zionist movement. It's a classically Jewish dissident work. And these are excerpts from the letter. Lately, I have become increasingly aware that the official policy of the Zionist organization and the opinion of the vast majority of Zionists are quite incompatible with my own convictions. I therefore feel that I can no longer remain a leading official within the Zionist organization. The Zionism championed by me since 1909 was in no time political. I and a group of my friends regarded Zionism as a moral, spiritual movement within which we could realize our most fundamental humane convictions, our pacifism, liberalism, and humanism. It has often been argued that we Jews could not unreservedly sponsor pacifism or ethical politics among the European peoples, since this would result in our being regarded as alien and traitors. Zion was to be the place where we would be able to realize our humanitarian aspirations. The reality of the Zionist movement and of Jewish settlements in Palestine is far from all this. You know that for years I have been fighting the battle for those ideas which to me have been the very meaning of Zionism. Eventually, these ideas gained focus in the so-called Arab question. It has, alas, become increasingly clear to me that in this respect, the Zionist organization has failed utterly. The overwhelming majority of Zionists feel justified in pursuing a course which I cannot follow. For the few who think like me, the need for an honest and clear decision has arrived. As a Jew and as a human being, as a Jewish human being, two qualities which in me are inseparable and parallel. I am a pacifist, an anti-imperialist, and what in America is called a radical. I am emphasizing these 3 points because they are called into question by official Zionist policy. I cannot concur with this policy when the Arab national movement is being portrayed as the wanton agitation of a few big landowners. I know all too well that frequently the most reactionary imperialist press in England and France portrays the national movements in India, Egypt, and China in a similar fashion. In short, whenever the national movements of oppressed people threaten the interests of colonial power, I know how false and hypocritical this portrayal is. I can even less be a party to this approach when such is the attitude of a people which consciously regards itself as a chosen people, and when the future of a movement, the Zionist movement, which I can only envisage if it is built on ethical foundations, is at stake. The means determine the goal. If lies and violence are the means, the results cannot be good. We pretend to be innocent victims. Of course the Arabs attacked in August. Since they had no armies, they could not obey the rules of war. They perpetrated all the barbaric acts that are characteristic of a colonial revolt. But we are obliged to look deeper into the causes of this revolt. We have been in Palestine for 12 years, since the establishment of the British Mandate and Jewish national home in Palestine, without having even once made a serious attempt at seeking through negotiations the consent of the indigenous people. We have been relying exclusively on Great Britain's military might. We have set ourselves goals which by their very nature had to lead to conflict with the Arabs. We ought to have recognized that these goals would be the cause, the just cause of a national uprising against us. Having come to this country as immigrants, we were duty-bound to come up with constitutional proposals which, without doing serious harm to Arab rights and liberty, would have also allowed for our free cultural and social development. But for 12 years, we pretended that the Arabs did not exist, and were glad when we were not reminded of their existence. The Arab riots, which were suppressed by the British, should have been met as quickly as possible by peace proposals instead of evasive maneuvers. That was our duty. But just like the powers in the First World War, we have declared that we would gladly make peace if only we were strong enough. That means we are seeking a victorious peace just as they were, a peace whereby the opponent does what we want. Naturally, each party wants peace on the condition that he can obtain what he considers essential, not, however, a higher forum and not a more lofty conscience. It was against this attitude taken by the powers in the First World War, and against this point of view that the true pacifists rebelled. I would be glad if we also had a few such pacifists among our ranks. If only the Jews could show such courage in their own affairs, as was demonstrated, for example, by the English pacifists in the World War. Each delay in the signing of a peace treaty renders peace more difficult by widening the gap between the two peoples. The Arab national movement is growing, and it will continue to grow. In a short time, it will be much more difficult for us to reach an agreement than it is today. Increasing our numbers by tens of thousands will not make it any easier. This letter is meant only for you. It requires no answer. It deals with questions which each individual must ultimately answer for himself. My resignation from the Zionist movement closes an era of my life. I have 20 years spent exclusively in Zionist activity, 10 of them in Keren HaYesod, is no small part of a human life. One is accountable both to himself and to his friends for such a period. I have written to you about the road which I have now placed behind me. I still know very little about the road ahead of me. The old beaten paths of national policy, as they were followed by the European peoples in the 19th century, the Eastern peoples in the 20th century, and now by the Jewish people, are for me no longer valid. We must search for a completely new and different path. Sometimes I still retain a proud hope that the Jews, nationally conscious Jews, might forge these new paths. With most cordial wishes and greetings, faithfully yours, Hans Kohn.